It's easy for us to get sentimental about this, but the simple reality is it's much more efficient in that kind of life to make sure that babies thrive and are happy and don't bother you as much. They bother you far less when they're happy. They don't get in the way. You don't have to attend to them with quite the amount of energy as a baby who is agitated and disturbed and anxious. In complex societies that already changes the moment the baby is born in our kind of world, and there's much more to be anxious about in our world too. So again, I want to balance this, and I think Phil Bennett pointed this out already, that Reich and Kevin Hinchy was reading from Reich himself. Reich is very aware that it's not about setting up some utopian. Matter of fact, Reich was very suspicious of utopian solutions, and you know the famous quote that I always like, talking about anarchism. Reich said, he had sympathies for anarchism, but he felt that the anarchists had the same problem as the nudists. That you just, all your sexual problems don't go away. Thousands of years of sexual repression don't disappear because you take your clothes off. And similarly, we have reasons for being anxious about our babies, bringing anxiety into our own interactions with children. But what is crucial, it seems to me, is that we then must understand the consequences of that. So that the possibility, what we're faced with, is that from before you get to adolescence or post-puberty, you're faced with the fact that you're already living in and encountering a high state of socially armored organization and construction, and a blocking of natural function to hopefully lesser degree, but to some degree, right? And as that evolves or that moves, you get to what we call in our society adolescence, and that raises the other key question. There is no such thing as adolescence in nature. Adolescence does not. Adolescence is a social construct. In nature, right, there is pre-puberty and there is puberty. Right? With puberty comes the capability of reproduction and adult responsibility of being productive. Right? Adolescence is only seen in societies that are economically, and here Reich would go to, certainly, and was deeply aware of the work of Marx and Engels, and corrects it. Adolescence is the result of the economic luxury of producing a subclass of human beings who can basically wait for 5 or 10 years before they take on adult responsibilities. Okay, so faced with that, you need to then, in a complex society, obviously set up rules, and societies begin to set up rules about what young people who are waiting do. And in our complex societies, what the rules are is not so much what you do as what you don't do. You don't do this, you don't do that, that's bad, that's not good, that's not acceptable, that's not right, right? And so, really, I want to finish up and then allow you time for questions and answers. That basically the issue here is not so much, to me, it's not so much whether there is such a thing as the sexual rights of youth. It's what society has done to construct an idea that there is a period of time in which you forego or abandon your natural function. Right? And I think that's what Reich was struggling with, is the confrontation with the fact that you have an inherently natural function which can be seen, can be isolated, can be studied, and which he did against incredible odds in a world where you weren't, it's not even that you weren't supposed to touch yourself, you weren't supposed to look at it. And that not only, even among the sexologists, you weren't supposed to look at it, right? The famous, Reich talks about, in Reich Speaks on Freud, that his first lecture to all the big guys, Freud and others, Freud wasn't present, but all of Freud's closest associates, his first lecture in, I think, 1920-something on masturbation and sexuality, I forget which one it was, it might have been Abrams or something, came up to him afterward and said, you know, brilliant, brilliant, but did you have to talk about sexuality so much? Did you have to give the word sex so much? You know, I mean, so and these were the, you know, so the point is, for Reich to even get a clear sense of it, but in my sense, what I felt Reich continues to struggle with, and the real struggle there, is that he sees that there is a way to have natural function. He understands that something has gone wrong. He begins to uncover what's gone wrong, but he never has the time or opportunity to really get to a point of figuring out how to begin to alter that and change that. What he begins to understand, and what I think you see in the sexual rights of youth, the sexual struggle of youth, and all this material, is the need to get young people to begin to not only demand their rights, and he got into trouble with the world, you know, the World Organization for Sexual Freedom, Margaret Sanger and Huxley and all that group, because he wanted real radical rights of young people to build their own rules and to build their own communities and things like that. I think that was a valiant attempt to say that you need to allow young people to emerge and discover what their natural sexual function is and how to best organize it. And that's utopian in some ways, certainly in the world that we live in, but I think he struggled with that his whole life. And the final statement is, I think at the end, in following up on something that Dr. Bennett presented, and in the end, I think the reason that the reason that's important, the difference between the early edition of the Sexual Rights of Youth and the later edition, in my view, is that the earlier edition is directly connected to activism. He's in the community, he's with young people at rallies, really actively generating, and it was very apt that the survey that he used of asking what should we do, how should we do it, was reflective of that. The later editions were, he himself says in Beyond Psychology and in other writings, he's more isolated, he has less access to, you know, he's finding out more about young people, not from young people, from his own kids to some extent, but mostly he's finding out about young people from the people who he's working with, who are giving him reports, like the group that you described, who were reporting to him. Dr. Sobey's wife, Francine Sobey, was actually one of those people who was a social worker and involved in working with adolescent projects and adolescent health and sexuality. So these were the kinds of things I think, you know, he began to, you know, talk more in a somewhat more removed observation of what could work, what you needed to do, but there was no longer any capacity to take it out to an active movement. Then the 60s, he was dead by the 60s. The 60s maybe would have presented another opportunity, but the 60s became a total, you know, discharge in a definite direction of basically equivalent, in my view, to taking your clothes off and figuring it's all going to be good. Okay. So those are my remarks.
Thank you.
And, you know, so then, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You did a great job of showing the differences between sort of early society and the more complex, and how complex it becomes then to understand the social construction of human beings, let's say.
Right. I think that's better than just social construction of sexuality.
Right, because and so that points to sort of the dialectical relationship that seems between the formation of an individual in relation to the larger society, all the social cultural rules and organizations and everything. So how do you, so that's all going on, but if you go to that fundamental, first, number one, the whole issue of energy, and your description of all experience is driven by energy and sort of basic pulsation. How do you, not you, but how do we resist kind of the mechanization of this understanding of the formation of a person through an understanding of energy? In other words, if everything can be reduced, I mean, it could be a reductionist analysis. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, often Reich is accused of being reductive, and one of the great, you know, although I don't necessarily see it as criticism, and part of what science does at its best is attempt to reduce to fundamental principles. often Reich is attacked for being reductionist, meaning that it gets so simple that it becomes it becomes meaningless. I don't think that's the case. The issue, I think, that you're raising is how do we avoid ourselves making this into